in Massachusetts.
Yeah.
Western Massachusetts at the moment. We're at this stage in our lives, our kids are all grown up, so we tend to go between Rhode Island, which is the smallest state in the U.S., Massachusetts, both in New England, southern New England, and then because we're getting old and because my husband's Canadian, we go to Florida a lot.
Yeah, I only have the context of Florida being synonymous with
geriatric.
Well, I wasn't going to say Jerry. I was trying to think of like the nice way to put it, but I do. I have that association from TV shows, largely.
Walkers.
Yeah, I've never been, but apparently it's a thing. In fact, I was watching an episode of Seinfeld the other day, and there was a reference to it there. I think his parents lived in Florida.
Yeah, you have to. It's a rule. You didn't know? It's a law.
It's the thing. Why is that? Is it the weather?
It is the weather. It is the weather. And there's the other thing is my husband and I have not done this yet. But the other thing is we have a little place there. My son lives in Florida also. He's not old. But there are different taxes depending where you live in the United States.
Okay.
And it's something Europeans always find, like, just how can it be so different? If you drive 40 minutes across state, can you have a completely different tax structure, et cetera? But so a lot of people, when they retire, they want the tax structure of Florida because it has no income tax. I think it has very little estate tax when you die, the tax on your property when you die.
Yeah.
So things like that. So even the kids want you to go there. Because
I see. So the whole Mar-a-Lago thing, that's a tax thing.
In
Probably.
his case, I assume everything is a tax thing, and he has had Mar-a-Lago a long time. I mean, since the 80s.
Oh,
so
okay.
that's not a new thing. But
no, I guess not. But now we've seen the tax records.
Anyone.
now we've seen the tax records. He needs all the help he can get by the look of it.
Yeah, I know. It's really a tragedy. Poor man.
Poor man, indeed. Never mind. Poor old Donald. So it'd be. I was going to say it'd be great to get started, but we've kind of already got started. It'd be good to talk about your journey into veganism. What got you started, Michele?
Well, a couple things. I think it was kind of became a perfect storm. My first really strong exposure to it was when my daughter went through a vegan period, and I was very concerned about her eating as a typical mom, who grew up giving her kids meat, dairy, eggs. I was worried about it. And so around that time, I wanted to educate myself. I wanted to learn. And that's when I started listening to some podcasts, and especially of vegan ultra endurance athletes. I don't know why. For some reason, that's what got into my ears. And I was thinking, well, because my daughter was a sporty person. She played squash and she was active. And I thought, okay, well, if these guys can run 100 miles, they can without eating meat, dairy, and eggs, she'll probably be okay. And I'll probably be okay. And one of the other things I did during that time was I started to imagine myself modeling for her the kind of choices. I didn't think she was eating enough vegetables. I didn't think she was eating enough, correct foods. So, I started just putting myself in that position, and the shift happened that, this is actually possible. And I think, and I was late to this party. I mean, I just believed it was impossible for someone like me, impossible in my lifestyle, impossible to travel and be with family. So, but kind of modeling that behavior with her for a while. And then actually going into restaurants and asking for the vegan options because I wanted them to have something for her. And then I just got used to it. And so that's when the penny drops and you go, oh, actually, this is not impossible. I can do this. Then you go, well, why aren't I? And so in 2015, end of 2015, I just made that full commitment.
Yeah. So when she first said, I'm dabbling with this whole veganism thing, and I totally understand the parental kind of like concern, but from an ethical standpoint, was her reasoning environmental?
Her reasoning was totally ethical.
totally ethical.
Yeah.
And from that point of view, were you kind of like, yeah, I'm with you on that. It's more the,
yeah. You're
Yeah.
still an adolescent, and you're active, and I just didn't know and I didn't think that I thought she was, at the time, I thought she was a little bit of a, salad and French fries type of eater, which was understandable and then she went to France for a year and she really had a hard time. France is much easier now, but about 10 years ago, it was harder, especially if you're young and a student and you're eating with school or groups where they're choosing the menu for you and you have to sit and join. So so anyway, she's had a harder time keeping on that trajectory, but I stayed on it.
And did you thrive as you kind of would hoped you would have, like listening to all these ultra marathon runners and so on? Did you notice?
Yeah, because I'm not that sporty. I'm not that sporty, but I did thrive. And I think it is also kind of what brought me through my trajectory of realizing, more viscerally, how what we believe is what shows up in our lives. And for all the time, I always say, I never thought I could be vegan until I stopped thinking that all the time. And I started thinking, I wonder if I could. Maybe I could. Maybe I could move in that direction. And when I started asking myself and thinking those questions and believing that I could at least do better, it just kind of opens up and you see all the ways you can. So anyway, my journey, and that kind of experience of seeing if you can go, I always think if you can go vegan in a world that's so not vegan, you can really do everything. It just opens up how many other things am I just talking myself out of, just saying, no, that's not possible. I couldn't be that way. I couldn't go back on my history that way. I used to think my family is, my husband's family is all Polish. I'm half Polish. And so like things like, I'm like, well, how could holidays, how could the family gatherings be vegan? And, just bit by bit, they are for me now. And almost nobody minds. I'm sure some people grumble somewhere behind my back, but in general, everybody seems fine with it.
So were you, when this happened, were you kind of still between New England and Florida and play, or were you kind of fixed in New England?
Mostly wasn't in Florida yet at that point.
Right. So, and what was the kind of response to what you were doing like there? How easy was it to sort of fit in with other folks and get something to eat when you were out and all that kind of stuff? Yeah,
sometimes. It was a mixed bag. I think sometimes really easy, sometimes I think I had a persona among my friend group of Michelle does her own thing a little bit. So I think people were like, all right, whatever. So, but it does kind of slow your roll in terms of you don't just show up at somebody's house for dinner.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to put yourself in that position. You also don't want to put them in that position where they're serving foods and you're going, yeah, no, I'm just going to sit here and eat this green pea or something like that. So that, and I think for me, my personality, that's not quite as difficult as it can be for some other people. But still, I don't like other people feeling really put out all the time. Yeah. And when I was new, I thought, well, what if I can't keep it up? What if I drop the ball? This is going to be Michelle with her new enthusiasm, So I think in the long run, it's only been good. I think people take me more seriously when I say something because I live this way now. And my goal with everything I do now is to try to help people believe it might be possible.
Yeah.
Because I don't believe anybody wants to eat dead animals. I really don't think anybody wants that. Even historically, I don't think people wanted that. I think it was what they thought was necessary for whatever reason. Maybe it was actually physically necessary for millennia, and maybe in parts of the world it's still physically necessary right now. But I don't think if you have that choice, that's the choice you really want to make. You just don't see how you're going to make it happen.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really interesting. As you're talking there, I don't get a sense that when you transitioned into veganism that you were a particularly aggressive or obstinate vegan in your approach to others. You weren't. It doesn't sound like you were particularly kind of forthright in the way that you were putting it across. Like you had other methodology to helping people along the way. Would that be fair to say? I think it's fair. I feel like I think everybody has their own way of being active in the world and of trying to do what they think is right. I always feel if I'm annoyed. And you mentioned Mar-a-Lago. if I'm that does
annoyed,
make blood boil, yeah.
If I'm annoyed on the planet, I think, what do I do? Because, yes, I'm like any other human, I'm very liable to get sidetracked, like that shouldn't be happening. This shouldn't be the way it is. I can get there, but it's so useless. It's such a waste of my energy. So I do like to always go back to what can I do? How can I show up? How can I be proud? If I think something's corrupt, if I think something is unfair or cruel, where am I? And so, because I don't have a lot of impact in world affairs or in government. And I did love the UK. I love watching the UK's governmental issues in the last couple months because it made me feel like, okay, your turn.
we are not in any position to judge what goes on in the US. Like we haven't been we've had 12 years of conservative government, Boris Johnson, the latest shenanigans going on. I mean, where do we begin? We're very much in the same boat. We can't come at this from any pious position.
No, and I don't think Brits do. I actually don't think the Brits do. I think we all know it's our turn at one point or another with our governments. But all the more reason for us to really be thinking, okay, that isn't working that well. What can I do in my community, or even in my family? What can I even do for myself to safeguard myself, make myself as healthy, resilient, and just in alignment with with my morality? If I'm judging somebody else's standards, where am I with my own?
Yeah.
So that's why I'm not too preachy, because I always feel like there's more for me to do.
But whilst not too preachy, like myself, you found an avenue to talk about it. So when did that sort of become a decision for you and a way to approach kind of your activism, if you like?
Yeah. I think because I found podcasting, so they were my, the people I listened to, like Howard Jacobson, Sid Garza-Hillman, who've been nice enough to be on the show, Dr. Lori Marbus, Rich Roll, who hasn't been on the show. But some of these people were people I listened to, and they helped me go, oh, I can do this. Oh. And so just having that in I'm not somebody who can sit and watch a lot of shows just because it's not my energy to sit and watch something. But I like doing things and having their voices in my ear. And so when I kind of felt like I had some experience and some skills and something to say to people, largely women my age, who I know don't want to eat animals, and they may actually be having doctors and other people saying, you really need to rethink this. I want them to hear that there was a woman who understands that feeling and is like, yeah, come along. It doesn't have to be perfect to start. I'm not a relativist in the long run. I do think once you move along that line, you want to really, what am I trying to say? In the long run, I think that cruelty is cruelty and compassion is compassion. So I'm not really a relativist, but I do think people need to start somewhere. And until they believe that they can live that way, they just push it completely aside. So I wanted to be that voice in their head that says, yeah, you can do it. And maybe you start small, and maybe you just start with thinking that the reason you're not living this way is not because it's true, not because you can't. It's just because you're not used to it. You're not used to thinking of it.
See, that's interesting, the point about not being a relativist and you know, meeting folks where they are, sort of appreciating that, but then at the same time, sort of, you know, there is compassion and so on and so forth. And I sort of, that really chimes with me, because I feel very much the same. I go betwixt and between the idea of, well, you know, you need to find people where they are, and if they're not there, then that's fine. But then I also get really concerned by the sort of language that I think maybe is actually being introduced by companies who have a vested interest, but like the flexitarian language and the part-time vegan language, which just like is how can you be part-time in something that is like an ethical position? Like, so I go betwixt and between that. I don't know if that's something you sort of share, where you're kind of on one hand, like 1 minute feeling quite angry about the way the world's sort of showing up in that way, and then on the other hand going, well, this is kind of a practical element on a personal, individual basis.
Yeah, well, I'm a Gemini, so I always think everything is like, well, on the other hand, and I like to think two things can be true, especially when we're talking macro, especially when we're talking, you know, billions of people and billions of stories. And it's why I call it Vedge Your Best, not Vegan Your Best, because I don't think you can. I think vegan is really not a goal, but it's a practice. That's what I often say. And it's like, to me, it's sort of like yoga. It's sort of like a spiritual practice. It's something that you keep coming back to. You are never done. You're never a vegan. There's no international policing or accreditation bureau that says, yes, it's how you show up every day. And as you go through life, you find other areas where you could be doing something a little bit differently if you're paying attention. But in the beginning, you start with the big things, the things that you know about. And everybody does that differently, I think. So in terms of, and I was worried about experienced veteran top vegans coming at me and saying, you can't do that. You can't meet people where they are. But I don't think that's true. I mean, people like Dr. Melanie Joy, who's been on the podcast, she's a marvelous, I mean, she's not a relativist in any way, but she also believes in meeting people where they are.
Yeah, it's a challenge, that one, isn't it? And you've triggered a thought in me about you from a podcasting point of view, and obviously you've helped loads of folks, hopefully, in terms of them hearing that voice in their ear that makes it feel approachable, and so on and so forth. And I love that kind of idea, that kind of goal, if you like, that mission for the show. What has it given you, though? As a podcast host, when you went into it, your idea was your sense of purpose was to help others, but has it helped you in your sort of practice of veganism? And I love that kind of way of putting things.
Well, yeah, I guess it has. Well, mostly it's my way of giving back, because I did think of all the media that has affected me in my life. I think podcasting has affected me in the most positive way, because it is less mediated by sponsors and selling. And though, I mean, plenty of podcasts have sponsors, but I feel like it's a lot less subliminal, a lot less. It's a lot more like, this is my sponsor, but it's not like the undercurrent of the show is the sponsorship. Yeah. So I do like actually hearing people fairly unmediated, fairly clean with all the things that they're stuttering over or thinking stream of consciousness. I love that. And it makes me feel, if somebody says that how they're living a vegan lifestyle, and it's in my ear, and I hear them talking through it and telling me what was hard and saying what they're still struggling with, to me, that makes being a vegan easier, because I'm not going, oh no, I shouldn't have any questions. I shouldn't have any doubts or any concern. It should be simple, or I'm not doing it right. So, and so for me, being a podcaster, showing up has also given me a sense of what other people struggle with. And it's shown me even more clearly that it's a matter of this practice and belief and coming back. I've done 125 weekly consecutive podcasts. And I have never done anything else in my life. 125, I don't think, except maybe eat. I don't know. I don't think I've done anything else for 125 weeks in a row. So it's given me a sense of, oh, I wouldn't have believed that. So being vegan has also just made me, what else could I do? How else could I show up? What else could I invite people onto? And I'm so glad to have you with me today to talk to you after it's been a few months that we've tried to put this together.
Yeah.
And it's just such a way to meet other people who are living in a way that's inspiring to me.
Has it given you a sense of community as well? I mean, I've certainly found this, that when I first became vegan, I probably felt quite isolated, even from people I was already within a community, because suddenly we had this very different perspective on the world. Like my entire axis had shifted, and then I found it quite difficult then to relate to people that I related to just fine before. And I probably have tried, or I probably have got better at sort of squaring those worlds off and appreciating where people are at different times, and understanding that, I went so many years without thinking like this, so I shouldn't really judge others for where they're at. But it still did leave me, and still does occasionally, with a sense of like isolation. And actually, I've found personally that the network of people I've met through the world of podcasting has actually like opened up the world to me, if you like. Has that been your experience?
Absolutely. There's no question. No, people email me, or Instagram is probably where I'm most interactive with people. And yeah, a lot of people just say, oh, I see what you're doing. It gives me a sense that maybe I could try something. Or other people who are way ahead of me and have done many more things are like, I loved seeing what you did there. I love that you've come into the space. And so it is really also a very nice community. A few trolls here and there, but anytime you leave the house, you run the risk of running into somebody who's full of judgment, and I don't even believe half those people are real. I actually think 2/3 of them are not real. They're just saying things, but it's I find it a nice community.
So. Yeah, 100%. Thinking back, it's a difficult question to answer. About 125 episodes, is there some ones that really stand out for you? When you look back, are there ones that actually felt like quite watershed moments, or quite pivotal to your kind of own understanding of veganism?
Well, I did solo episodes for a long time, and I still probably do mostly. But recently, so many people have been reaching out, or I've reached out to, and they've said yes. I think when Melanie Joy came on and Colleen Patrick Goudreau just like a week ago, I was nervous to invite them for a long time, and so I think when I got to 100 episodes, I was like, okay, well, I guess I could ask. I guess I'm not just like, a dilettante, and, I'm actually kind of a big deal. So no, I never think I'm a big deal, but it just kind of made me think like I was kind of proud of myself, and my family will laugh about how jazzed I am because if they say, oh, how many episodes? I go, consecutive weekly episodes. I feel like I'm Captain Jack Sparrow in Pirates of the Caribbean. So I want my full consecutive weekly moniker. So but I think when I got brave enough after 100 to really start asking some people who I thought were really likely to say no, and they said yes, that was kind of a watershed for me.
I think that's a huge thing about podcasting over other mediums as well, is that in my experience, guests are far more likely to say yes than I think they probably would to other forms of media. I've been amazed, actually, and maybe it's also a vegan community thing. I think there's probably also an element of that too, that if a vegan podcaster is reaching out to them, they're kind of probably a bit more feel a bit more comfortable saying yes. But I also think there's an element of podcasting. I think there's something I like to think anyway, probably not when they come on mine, but there's something enjoyable about the experience of like being on a show, almost cathartic.
Yeah, well, I think it's friendly. I think it's just kind of by definition a friendly medium. It's like having a conversation. Some of the more glam, highly produced podcasts, I think, lose that friendliness, that friendly feel. So I'm curious how that's going to go. I know some of these more highly produced podcasts are doing very, very well. But I don't find myself drawn to them. I really, I find myself drawn to a voice, a person who I'm like, oh, I'm interested in them. Not because they're saying everything the way I want them to or believe, but because I feel like I'm hearing something that's trickling through, percolating through a human brain that's working out some ideas and thinking about things.
Talking of that, working out ideas and so on as you think about them, and this may be my own confession as an excuse for not preparing, but I rarely write questions for that very reason. What's your approach to that when you're in the interviewing space as opposed to the solo show, obviously?
Typically, I want people to talk as much as possible, and I try not to have too many questions, except for the questions I have about what they're saying. So I try to be in the moment with them. It doesn't always work as well as, sometimes the brain wanders and sometimes I find myself going, I'm fascinated. And then I have like, should I be stepping in here a little bit more? Should I be mediating this for my listener? Next week or 3 weeks from now when they're listening. I just had a woman who, I think it went live yesterday. She runs the Rhode Island Vedge Fest, and she basically founded it. And I spend a lot of time in Rhode Island. It's my favorite state. And halfway through it, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, is it only me that's going to be interested in it? And I've gotten so many people in just like 24 hours are like, no, it was great to listen to her because she's doing something. We're seeing how a vegan entrepreneur or founder or creator is developing something that hasn't been done yet in her area. So that was the universal part. But I do find myself sometimes panicking that my listener is going to have different concerns. But I actually think I am my listener, and that's who I have to that's who I have to be fine with. That if it interests me, it will probably interest other people. Maybe not 90% of them. Maybe it'll be a lower percentage this time. But I think that I have to go with what I'm interested in.
Yeah, and I think like your curiosity sort of shows up, in those sort of moments. And if you weren't curious and you were trying to sort of second guess where your audience were at too much, I think there's probably a danger that it's actually less interesting as the premise of two interesting individuals having a conversation. It sort of doesn't become that. It becomes a bit too scripted, I find. Like if you're just waiting to get to the next question because it's like, well, this is what I think my listeners are into, can be a bit dangerous.
I agree.
I like your approach.
Yeah, and also I think things do evolve over time. I'm always listening when people are talking. I'm always listening because it is the work I do with clients for something they say about a shift in what they believed was possible for them. So I am always listening when people are saying something about how, because this is our life. Our life is this not just actions that get us from, age 1 to age 90, but they're actions that happen only because we believe it's possible, or we're thinking it's possible, or we're curious whether it's possible. So everything we're doing is always being informed by our beliefs, our thoughts, our value system, our emotions, whether we're angry or whether we're feeling connected or whether we're feeling separated. So I do look for that in my conversations, because that I think those are the inspirational moments when people change what they're doing because they've had a different thought, a different feeling.
When you set out, did you think you were going to get to 125 consecutive episodes?
I don't know what I thought.
And now you're there. What's the plan?
I'm going feet first out of it. I think I'm here for a while. I like it, and I also find it. I think for many years I lived a very. I'm 63 now. I started podcasting, I think, at 60. I think I was 60 that year. And I also feel like I want everyone to know this is not the time to just play cards. It's not just the time. It's the time to do whatever really interests you, not just if you're slowly able to walk away from some of the things you had to do in terms of family responsibilities or work responsibilities. If you've got that extra time, do something that just sets you on fire. Do something that you think is exciting in some way, and also do something that makes you a little bit nervous and scared, because we don't want to just sit where it's 76 degrees. Well, I'm Fahrenheit, but it's just, there's this stereotype of older people having to have the temperature at exactly one temperature and sitting in one chair that's comfortable and eating the same foods all the time. And this is really a time, if you have your health, to use it for something.
Yeah, I love that. Personally, like, I get into the over the 100 mark, and then now 172.
Yeah, you're coming up on 200.
Yeah, but I that wasn't. I like you. I don't know what the intention was at the beginning. It was just. I thought. I remember celebrating getting to 10, thinking, "Oh, that's good. I've done a podcast now. That's a thing that's happened." And like, little did I know, sort of 3 years later, I'd quit the day job and do something podcast related. And yeah, I mean, it's a crazy world. I was talking to somebody the other day about, because I've got a little boy who's 4, and we were talking about jobs and teachers and stuff like this. And they were saying, they were a teacher, and they were saying, the thing is, we're teaching kids for jobs that don't exist yet. And it really like chimed with me. Like, if you'd said to me when I was my little boy's age, well, one day you're going to be producing podcasts for people, that didn't even exist. Wasn't a thing. But yeah, I wouldn't have thought that would be a thing that I could possibly aim for or do. So it's just amazing how the kind of world shifts, and you follow your passion, and it's funny where you end up.
It's so true. And that's another thing, is you want to stay a little bit agile if you have the luck to have any choices in your life. Some people don't, but if you do have choices, and most of us have a lot more choices than we think. I think a lot of us can get waylaid by, well, I can't because of. I remember my dad used to sometimes say things like, he was a physician, he was a psychiatrist, and but he would say, I can't because I've got kids and tuitions and this, and I used to feel really awful about that, because I felt like I was, he was calling me a problem in his life, that he could do something else. And so I never wanted that my kids to feel that way. But I also think it's just, we are weighed down by different responsibilities and different circumstances in our lives, but we really want to look for the things that we can just shoehorn. And sometimes we make things too hard. And podcasting can be easy-ish you know, as media goes, you can do a crackly, messed up, bad sounding podcast from your closet. It's possible. And it gives you a chance to just try something and see if it works. And I know when you said you got to 10, I think I read somewhere when I was around 10 that most podcasts never get to 10.
Yeah, it's true.
So many people just try in 2 or 3 or 5.
Yeah.
But 200, we have to have a party, Jim. We have to have a party at 200. That's coming right up.
I'm often saying that to clients, you know, like if you get beyond 10, you're ahead of like 90% of the podcasts that have existed, which is
in history,
which is pretty crazy, like to think about. But it's difficult in its own kind of way. I mean, you know, we're not saving lives or digging mines or whatever. Like, you know, but it's, you know, there's a perseverance to it, and often it's you know, even for me now, like it's my own show is a side hustle. It's a project. It's not even a hustle. I don't make any money out of it, really. It's a passion project. And I've, you know, been lucky enough to afford more time to do it because I've decided to make podcasts for other people, which then is the hustle, as it were. But yeah, it's a time consuming business, you know, like, and then you get dragged into, okay, well, I'll just do an audio one. And then it's like, okay, well, you need social clips, don't you? So then you're like, well, I'll do a little bit of video. And then before you know it, you're like, you know, I'm sat here with soft boxes around me and
well, that's what you do for your clients, right? You do all that parts, all the side things, because that is truly what's hard. The social media.
Yeah.
So what do you perform for the clients that take you on?
Yeah, so folks will folks will come to me in whichever way they want to do it, really. I mean, there was a discussion initially about, like, you know, how much, what do you want to put into this, you know, financially and time-wise, because, you know, we can start with, like, you do a Zoom call and you know, we'll start with your earpods that you got free with your iPhone a couple of years ago. We can start with that, and that will work to a degree, and we can get you up and running. And then I'll usually take their video and I'll put graphics on it, or I'll put frames on it and make it look branded and so on. And if it's audio, I'll polish it up and so on and so forth. And then I'll cut that into social media clips that, you know, are phone sized, and I'll subtitle those clips, because 80% of people are watching videos on their phone on Instagram without the sound on.
I know. Isn't that nuts? I know.
So, well, because they're usually on the bus, or they're on the train, or they're in the break room at work, or they're with their, unfortunately, they're probably sat at the other end of the sofa from their partner. And you're both watching videos with the sound off. So yeah, I subtitle those clips, and then all sorts of other stuff, really, like, you know, if it's thumbnails for YouTube, if it's transcripts even. So some folks will put a full transcript for accessibility reasons on their show's website. Also, obviously, has a nice benefit of helping their search engine optimization, because they've got the whole conversation is transcripted.
All those search words.
Yeah, if it's something to do with podcasting, I will probably do it for them. So yeah, I have clients doing all sorts of different stuff, some very complicated setups, and others really, really basic setups. Yeah, so it's not something I'd ever planned to get into, but now I'm here. I'm absolutely loving it.
And did you learn it all by doing your own podcast, or did you have a technical background before?
I had a little leg up. I worked for Apple for 10 years, and that helped me from one aspect of the technical. I've always been a nerd, like a bit of a geek with this stuff, with just tech in general. So I've always been fascinated with anything like that. And, you know, I'd like to think I've always been into kind of creative stuff too. I was in a lot of bands in a misspent youth, and tried to record a lot of bad albums and EPs and stuff. And play a lot of bad gigs and all that kind of stuff. But that gave me my way around audio and so on. You know, all my friends were either budding audio producers, or wanted to be in bands, and some of them still do that now. My best friend, who was my best man at my wedding, he works for ABC over in Australia now, as a sound engineer. So it's sort of always been around it somewhere, but it's not been my, I didn't really think it, talking about thinking about what's possible. I never thought it was possible that I could do something that I was passionate about almost. I thought work was something you do that you don't enjoy, and it's a means to an end, and then you come home and then you do stuff that you enjoy. And I had a bit of an epiphany during COVID, like many people did, I think, at the beginning of being sort of locked down, but actually it was in one way one of the most, and I appreciate this is coming from a position of absolute privilege, but I was in a position that I was able to spend just time with my family, and it was actually more freeing than it was a lockdown. It was, actually got me in touch with what was important in life, and then made me realize actually life is far too short to not be doing something you're passionate about for 40 hours plus a week. So I sort of went about thinking, how do I make the thing that I'm most passionate about the thing that I do all the time? And yeah, of course there's financial consequences to that over the nice safe job and all the rest of it, but it's a risk that although scary at times is starting to pay off slowly, and I can't see that I'd want to go back from it now.
So what would be since you know more than anybody, like I know how to put together a my little podcast, but you're putting together for your client something that's basically done for you, walk in the door, soup to nuts, depending on their budget. What is like your best recommendation for someone who has not done one, is terrified to do one, but does think that they have some sort of a message? Especially, I know you're very connected with a lot of vegan entrepreneurs and service people. What's your advice for them?
I do say to people, just start. Like, that is the best bit of advice I could give is don't get in awe of the podcasts that you see online that are like the Rich Roll show. Over here we've got Diary of a CEO. There's all these shows that they've got £40,000 worth of cameras and lighting equipment, a producer on hand, a whole marketing team behind them. And I think sometimes people are starting up and they're thinking, my show needs to look like that, or it can't exist. And I think, don't think like that. Like, just start, and building something in flight is the way of the world these days. Like, people are comfortable seeing a product that is being built as in front of their eyes. And in fact, like your most ardent listeners, they love the fact that they were there when it was, if it was you and your set of earpods and like you were recording it into your phone, they kind of love the fact that they were there then, and they're still here now when you've got the slightly bigger budget and so on. So I just get started. Like, the people will, it's unbelievable. I shouldn't probably say this as an audio producer, but people will listen to stuff that's really like not great quality, as long as it's kind of consistently not great. I think sometimes people, when it's really irksome, where it's like, it's completely unlistenable, of course, but where, I think about like radio shows, like traditional AM radio, right? AM radio doesn't sound great in the first place. Like, it's got it's not high fidelity kind of audio. And then secondly, like, you have like somebody phoning in, like, and it might be a actor or somebody that they're interviewing, and their line sounds terrible, and you're still quite comfortable listening to it if the content's good. So worry about the content. That bit you can control, and then learn the audio as you go. Speak to other people. Podcasters, like, in my experience, incredibly generous with their time and with their knowledge. Generally speaking, it's not maybe it is at the top end, and that's why I don't feel that, but certainly at my level, and certainly within the vegan community, people are sort of super willing to help. If you said to somebody, how does your podcast sound like that? Like, they'll happily tell you how they do it, and you can work out whether A, that's too technical, or B, it's too expensive at this point in your career, and maybe it's something to work towards. But yeah, just get started, record something, and then you can make it better.
Well, it's the same advice for everything, right? I mean, it's the same advice for veganism. You know, really, you're asking me to never eat another animal or animal product or my grandmother's cupcakes ever? And like, no, actually, I'm not. I'm asking you to today. Think about what you can, and also start with what you already know. I mean, so content, people say, how do you know your content? You do know things. If you've got any kind of a passion for communicating what you're going through, what you've got, people want to hear that from you. And that's what's great. There's billions of people who can listen and you don't need a market share that from like a TV ratings. You don't need that to have a real impact, and even to help. Even if you're selling something, even if you are selling your services, you don't need millions of people to listen. You can really make a difference with just even a few hundred.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and that's another stat that I think people don't realize is if you have 150 downloads, I think it is at the moment, might even be less than that now, but within the first 30 days of release of an episode, you're in the top 50% of podcasts in the world already. So, you know, and that might sound like, well, that's not a lot of people, but stand them all up in a room in front of you and talk to them. That's a fair amount of people to talk to. And if they're engaged with you and you've got a consistent, 100+ listeners a week, which isn't unattainable, shows can get that, like you say, 7 billion people in the world, then that's still a lot of people who are kind of engaged in what you're doing, and that's a little community right there, 100 people. So you've got to start somewhere.
That's absolutely right.
It'll grow.
I think, and showing up, it's a truism, I think, but showing up is 99%.
Yeah.
It's, I mean, you might not want your surgeon to just show up, but in general, podcasting is not brain surgery yet.
Nope.
And we can, and I think we do. I think, as I said before, we like to hear the meta. We like to hear people, like to hear the dog barking or the kid crying, "Mom, when are you going to be off?" I think that's
real
fun.
life.
It's real life.
Yeah,
it is real life.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, one of my favorite shows right now is a podcast. It's so niche. It's about British semi-professional ice hockey, right? And it's done by an ex-professional ice hockey player, semi-pro ice hockey player over here. Which is kind of it's a niche thing, but there's pockets of people in the UK who are really into this. It's not something we're known for, obviously, over here, but we do have a couple of semi-pro and one actually professional ice hockey league and so on. And I'm really into this show, and it's not necessarily the best produced. It's done over Zoom. It's okay. It's got better actually over the course of time, but it's just I love hanging out with the host and the guests that they get on, and it's just really interesting. And like you say, sometimes there's babies crying and stuff like that, and sometimes there's somebody at the door, and that's fine. It's all cool.
I love it when the host has to get up and sign for an Amazon package or something like that. It's the best, because you're like, oh, I'm really with this person. That is, though, you're reminding me of one of the things I do encourage people, if they're thinking, is to never be afraid of having something so niche. Don't worry. If I know some people who are podcasters for, I don't know, LDS Mormon families. So there's like LDS moms with special needs kids in whatever, Utah or Idaho. I mean, like super, super niche. But then everybody knows. I mean, you are connected now with people who need what you're saying, or who are curious with what you're saying. And if you're trying to make a podcast that's like Rich Roll or Joe Rogan, I mean, that's just going to make you nuts to try to appeal to a broad audience. So it's possible to grow, I think, more quickly if you've got a small core group that really gets you to begin with.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Yeah, the nichier the better. Like when I speak to clients, that's one of their concerns. Like, this is too niche. No one's going to listen to it. And I'm like, people will listen to it because it's niche.
Yeah.
Because, you know, like we're still in a world with podcasts where there isn't really an algorithm in Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It's not really serving you content like, say, TikTok or YouTube or whatever. So it's still possible to find a show just with a search. In fact, that's the number one way people do find shows, is just by putting a search term in. So like you say, if you're the Mormon mum who wants to find a community of other Mormon mums with kids who've got special needs in a particular area, then you search for anything around that and you will find the shows that are catering to you. Or if you want to find out about, you know, British semi-professional ice hockey teams, you search something around there, you'll find it. You know, you'll find that show. So yeah, I'd niche down, make it as niche as possible. If anything, like, I think my show now isn't niche enough. There's loads of vegan shows out there. There's loads of vegan shows out there, and like, what's the differentiating factor? Like, and I also think, you know, if I had my time again, I probably wouldn't do an interview show as regularly. Like, I love an interview show. I think it's great, and it's a pleasure for me to talk to different folks. But I think one thing listeners love in the niche shows is the relationship between folks. So if you have like two regular co-hosts, I always think that kind of works really well, unless you've got like a big name. Like, I think a lot of people, they watch Rich Roll and stuff and they think, oh, I want a show like that where I'm interviewing somebody every week. Well, that kind of, even Rich Roll's show, I don't listen to every week because some guests I'm just not into that particular
and it's
week.
2 hours.
And it's 2 hours. Yeah, it's 2 hours. Yeah, sometimes I'm like, well, I don't really want to hear from that person for 2 hours. Or maybe they'd be really interesting, but I just don't know who they are. So, you know, whereas if you've got like a relationship between, you know, a couple of hosts, 2 or 3 hosts, that works really well, you know, because it's consistent. I know where I'm, you know, whose living room I'm walking into, if you like. Who I'm sat around the dining table with, as it were. So
I agree with you. That's actually been something. You say you might not be niche enough. I've been thinking that too. I think I need to. I was afraid of pissing people off when I started. For want of a better term, and so I think I played it a little safer than I would recommend going. I wanted everyone to be happy with me. And I think sometimes it's better somebody's annoyed, you know. And the other thing is, I agree. I would like to have someone to talk to about things sometimes. But I find it so hard to get my work done every week that I can't imagine actually adding in the complication of somebody else on the other end. So
yeah. I'd recommend it's somebody you live with or you work with. You know, if you've got, otherwise, like scheduling. I had an idea for a show and I was working on it with somebody for a while, and like for the life of us, we just couldn't get a consistent time to record it, and we've ended up like putting it on the shelf somewhere. For that very reason, it's really difficult. So yeah, if you live with them or you work with them, then do it. But otherwise, it's pretty hard to get. Because I'm
sliding into my deadline every single week. I'm just like hammering right into it. Even if it's an interview and I've done it before, I'll end up procrastinating on doing my intro and my outro until that last minute. I just somehow I thrive on that adrenaline. I don't know. I don't recommend it. But I'm still like a 16-year-old, not finishing my exams.
Yeah, that's a tough one when you've got the weekly. I mean, I would like to say I am weekly, and I am. But the last month, I probably let go of it a little, and I've been like 10 days or 12 days on some weeks, and I've made my peace with it now. I'm okay with it. I've just let go of like. Although it is contrary to the advice I'd give any of my clients. With clients, I'm like consistency. But, you know, life gets in the way.
Well, you've got a small one at home, and you
Yeah,
had the
he's not
holidays
interested.
probably, and
Yeah.
and maybe like in our house, you had flu and cough due to cold, and
COVID, the whole thing. Like, we had it all. With a 4-year-old who just brings home everything from every party and every day at school. So, yeah, we had all the illness. We had the Christmas, the family bits and pieces. I was trying to move into this office, so I feel like every intro this week, I'm like, at the moment, I'm apologising for being slightly late. I'll get back on it soon, but it is when you have guests every week, that adds an extra layer of complexity with that. Really, like trying to get somebody's time scheduled in every single week it's difficult around your own stuff. And like I say, now I've added a
new business,
making other people's shows, like their shows, they've got to take precedence sometimes.
I was going to ask you, I bet they do. I bet you're more worried about how they sound than your own sometimes.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. Although I've got mine down to like a formula, like I know, I've got the same set of like plugins and EQ for my voice, and so on. So that's pretty easy. And I've got a good formula with the platforms I use and stuff. But with clients, obviously, you don't know what they're going to give you any given week in terms of quality, or that, like, if one of their guests had a difficult time with their sound on one side, I can sometimes end up doing a lot of repair work on that sort of side of things. And so I'm far more concerned with like whose deadlines I've got to meet for what particular week than I am with my own now. But it's all good fun. I'm still not quite at capacity yet, so
you still have some room in your stable, do you?
There's still a little bit of room.
Yeah.
There's still a little bit of room.
Who's the perfect Bloody Vegans podcast production client?
I think I don't know if I hope they're listening to this or not really, but I've probably already got them actually. I work with a vegan screen printer at the moment. So they run a business called Squeegee and Ink, and they are a manual print shop based in the UK. And essentially they print T-shirts for people, and they do so with vegan ink and organic cotton, fair trade, kind of ethically sourced T-shirts and so on. And they talk to screen printers all over the world about screen printing, and it's super niche, and they're a real community of folks. But I'm on a similar wavelength to them. I love what they do, so it's like a pleasure to listen to their show. I actually enjoy the process of listening and editing. They give me everything consistently every week, so that's always nice on a practical level. But yeah, it's always fun when you're listening to something that and in fact, to be honest, like every client I have, I really enjoy listening to their show. Like I was lucky enough to do, they produced the Think Like a Vegan podcast for Amelia Lease, who some listeners may have heard of, but if they haven't, you should check out her book, Think Like a Vegan, and a podcast, which is also of the same name, which I produced. That was a pleasure to work on, and we're doing season 2 coming up soon. I'm doing the Veganuary one at the moment as well, so the Veganuary organisation. Theirs is brand new, so we've been sort of working on it from what it's going to sound like and who's going to be on it and so on.
That'll
and that
be
one's
huge.
really
I think
cool.
that's going to be such a great. I mean, that's
It's been the biggest show I've worked on. Actually,
I'm surprised they didn't have one yet, actually. I was thinking, how do I not know about that one? But it's not even there yet. Wow.
It's brand new. Yeah, the 5th episode was just released, or 4th proper one was released last Sunday. So it's pretty new. In fact, next week, this Sunday, whatever date that is, 27th, 28th of January, if you're listening to this afterwards, you can still find it. But they've got the first vegan Michelin-starred chef on their show, a guy called Alexis Gauthier. Traditional French cuisine. He grew up with that kind of, he literally grew up, like he was talking in the podcast about his, he came home from school and he would have horse, like regularly. He would eat horse, and And his mum was really keen that he did, like it was what was going to make him strong and all this kind of stuff. And then later on in life, you know, after his training and so on, he was working in restaurants and then discovered veganism. And since he's made his entire restaurant operation vegan and has won a Michelin star off the back of it. And like his food's incredible and his philosophy on life is wonderful. So like, again, that was a pleasure to edit, you know, so I'm really fortunate when I get those kind of shows to do. It's like, it's the dream job for me. So yeah, I guess I've named loads there, but I've got a few dream clients, and I'm lucky enough that I'm working with quite a few of them already. So.
That is great. You know, and that's, I think that goes to what you just said about start, because when you start, then you learn who do you really work well with, and what you don't know until you start. It's actually the process of stepping forward. I always reference many times in the podcast that scene in Indiana Jones. I think it's the third one, where the leap of faith, where he has to walk and he has to take that step over that cavern, that terrible abyss, and then the bridge appears when he puts his foot down. And it's a little woo and it's a little silly, but it's also like, I think in life, this is what you step forward, and then now you have something to work with. Now you've got something that didn't work, something that did work, some new people, and then the next step, and you just have to keep going.
Yeah, it's like you either win or you learn, you know, what one or the other. Like there's no bad move you'll make, you know. If there isn't a step there, then you know, as long as it's not too traumatic a fall, you'll get back up and you'll just start again, you know. I
think that's right. And I do think that women traditionally are socialized not that way. I think some I'm sure it's changing a little bit, but I still see it so much that women are socialized to do the right thing, to do what works, not to be experimental and messy and throw the spaghetti against the wall. We're really kind of socialized to color in the lines. And so another reason, number 10 million, that I show up all the time, I show up messy. I show up because you don't have to do things perfectly coiffed and airbrushed. And, you know, you can just show up and start from there. And you can show up messy with your work, show up messy as a vegan, show up messy as a mom, dad. Yeah. You know, you don't learn to dad right away. And every year you've got a new kid, right? Because now he's 4, he'll be 5, he'll be 8.
Yeah, 100%. Like it doesn't. I mean, we've only been obviously doing it for almost 5 years, 4 and a bit years. You're absolutely right. Every week we're like, okay, right, we've nailed that now, that thing that's difficult. And then there's a new thing. You're like, oh, he's into this now. Or, oh, we have to figure that out now, you know, like, and then you chuck in the extra spanner of him being vegan in a world that's not vegan.
Yeah, going out into the world,
Yeah, that's a whole thing. Like, it was nice and easy when it was at nursery and none of the other kids really cared and all that sort of stuff. But, you know, now they're sat around the lunch table and they're asking him questions and he's 4, you know, so, but he's got a beautifully simple way of putting everything. He's just like, you know, we don't eat pigs because we're kind to pigs. We like them. And that's his, like, you know, pretty straightforward to him. It's like, yeah. And so I sort of, actually, he's teaching me loads of stuff about that, like the simplicity of discussion around this stuff. Like sometimes we can get caught up in the complexity of talking about veganism and the nuance, and you know, when it comes down to it, you know, we don't eat other sentient beings because it doesn't feel right to do that, so we just don't.
And that's, and I think that shows how we're still in. You know, I don't want to use it. I'll use a trauma analogy, even though I don't know that it counts as trauma. But there's that sense we're always trying to, if we come to veganism later, we're always trying to make sense of it still, because we're kind of always at odds. We're always typically rationalizing, defensive, looking for problems. We're like ready to, you know, we're ready to mix it up a little bit for our own, like to rationalize for ourselves, and also to, you know, maybe figure out how we're supposed to be vegan in a non-vegan world. And I think if you grow up in this way, you might not have that this exact same sense of it. and I always hope that someday I'm just the least interesting thing about me is I'm vegan. That's like my dream.
Yeah. The word disappears. That would be the absolute optimum for me, that we just, it's not a thing. I'd like it to flip the other way as well along that journey towards the word disappearing, that you have to explain why you're a carnist. Yeah. That's like, oh yeah, what, so you still eat meat? Oh wow. Okay. Why is that? That kind of thing. There's I've referenced it a fair few times, but I don't know if you've ever seen it. I don't know if it's translated over to the UK, but there's to the US, sorry. There's a UK documentary by a stand-up comedian called Simon Amstel. Yeah, you've seen it?
It's wonderful.
Yeah. It's amazing, isn't it? Like a mockumentary kind of thing about like veganism in the future. I love that.
What's the name of it? I can't remember. Is it
oh god, no, it might be. Oh, I've totally forgotten.
But Simon, what's his last name? Amstel. Simon Amstel. Yeah, he's so funny too. He's
great.
Marvelous.
It's great. The fact that was on the BBC as well, like, because the BBC, like, traditionally, like, or I don't know if I'm more susceptible to it, but every time I click on, there seems to be something that's either against veganism or against other environmental initiatives, whether it's solar panels or electric cars, renewable energy, whatever it is. There seems to be some kind of like
we have to balance it. It's like this kind of like balancing it. I know.
I know. We can't upset the farming community, that kind of thing. I mean, they still have a show on called Country File over on the UK, which they show every Sunday night, which is basically like a kind of advert for animal agriculture. It's kind of like farmers sort of allowing the greenwashing of it all, and showing idyllic scenes of animals on fields and so on, in fields and so on, in the sort of green pastures. And funny enough, they don't show the other side of it.
Yeah, because it is idyllic on the pastures. I was up by Hadrian's Wall up in the north a couple of years ago, and they have these marvelous sheep, just beautiful, dotted everywhere, and they just couldn't be more gorgeous. And that's just the thin end of the wedge, isn't it? Yeah.
Even that now, there's a guy called George Monbiot. You might have seen him, you might have heard of him. He's a author, writer, journalist in the UK. Quite active with Animal Rebellion over the years and things like that. Anyway, he did a video a while back, and he was talking about the UK countryside and how the kind of like there's this idyllic sort of vision of like green pastures and all this. Like we've literally, it's in songs and stuff, in hymns and things. But he was basically saying, like, when you think about it, this is like a desertified landscape. What that used to be is woodland, and now it's this parcelled up monoculture. There's like one crop there, which is grass, and then, a herd of cows or sheep or whatever. And like, so now if I'm like on a train or something and I'm, we're rattling through the sort of the green hillsides of England, I feel depressed by more than I am like...
Since you've thought of it that way.
Mm. Yeah, now I just think of it as like, what was there? Like, all that's left of what was there is this hedgerow, this sort of like, perfectly symmetrical hedgerow that's been put there to block in the farmer's property kind of thing. And what was there was like a really diverse landscape full of different creatures and, species and habitats and plants and trees and so on and so forth. Like, and that's, ever shrinking. Going back to Amelia Lease, she's got this amazing rewilding project up in Scotland that she's working on, and that, that's incredible. And there are more people that can do that kind of thing. There was another case, I think, in the UK where a group of vegans purchased it was a current, I think, dairy farm. They basically went up in an auction against other farmers, purchased this bit of land, and are now rewilding. So, there's little things like that give me some hope. But, it's still sort of, it's mildly depressing that we've sort of all hoodwinked into the idea that these lovely fields are lovely when actually they're scene of a crime.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it was a crime when they were started. I mean, I don't know. I have there I am doing my Gemini thing again. At one point,
there's balance.
At one point, people, that's what they did traditionally. They didn't have as many options. The thing is, we do have so many options, and we have seen, this is not about a herd of even 100 animals being taken to market. This is billions and billions of animals tortured from the minute they're conceived. It's that level of the atrocity, and for snacks, and for food that's going nowhere, and for food that's being wasted, and for food that's going to feed other animals that are being tortured. So it's I think what is interesting is how our what you just said, how our landscape reflects our choices historically. And we have a young country in the United States. You have young country in some ways. Other ways, it also reflects what the indigenous peoples in the U.S., how they lived. So wherever it is, we carve our landscape to show what we value and what we're worried about. And I think that's fascinating to look at our fields and know that was somebody's idea. That was a plan. That was a choice. It's not just how England is. I think that, so maybe not to be depressed, but maybe to know that if it was made that way, it can be made differently to reflect England the way, or the UK, reflect it the way it could be.
That's what excites me. I think about the rewilding stuff, and also like the Vegan Society doing some great work with farmers in sort of veganizing their farms. So showing them a way out. So for a lot of farmers, this is just a generational thing. Yeah. They didn't want to be there almost. Like there's an amazing film called 73 Cows.
It's a beautiful one,
directed, by Alex Lockwood. He was on Bloody Vegans really early on, like episode 9 or 10. And that film's incredible. Jay and Katya Wild, what they did with their farm. It was one of those situations, generationally owned, was a dairy farm, then was converted to a beef farm, because Jay essentially said there's more cruelty in a glass of milk than a pound of beef, which was sort of a striking quote from that film. And then they've now converted it. It's like a veganic kind of agriculture farm now, and they did that with the help of the Vegan Society. So bits like that, the rewilding projects, they do give me hope. They do make me think, actually, like you say, there is a way to, this was a design, this was a choice, and there's a way to design and choose our way out of it. When I'm in my more optimistic mindset, that's kind of where I tend to focus.
Yeah, I find it. I find sometimes we have to just choose to be optimistic. We don't have to feel it. It's just, it's just like, do I want to live pessimistically? It does. I don't find that it invigorates me in any way. When I'm feeling down, no. That doesn't get me in a situation where I want to go try something and learn something and help someone. It just gets me to want to sit and just like stare at my screens.
Yeah, I agree. It doesn't serve too well. But, it's a reality you sometimes have to work your way out of again. Yeah. It's the nature of living in a non-vegan world, I guess. We're always going to be confronted with these things, and then we're always going to have to kind of think about what the way out of it is, and the choices we can make and the impacts we can have.
And if we can come to an idea like veganism and see the world so differently from one period of our lives to another, what else is there for us? It's not the only thing that needs to be dealt with. It's not the only crisis. It's a big one, but it's not the only one. And it just makes you realize 100%. How if we can just keep being open and question ourselves kindly, we don't have to blame ourselves, because that doesn't help either. I think to question ourselves, it's just a wonderful lifelong practice. Like, why am I doing this? Is this in alignment with who I want to be and how I want to show up here?
I think that's a beautiful place to end up, Michele.
What a great time. Thank you, Jim. Thank you so much.
I love it. No, thank you so much for your time. I've really appreciated having you on the show, and vice versa.
That's right. Kill two birds with one stone, maybe.
Yeah, this will probably end up on both of our shows. So if you're listening and wondering why I'm doing a goodbye to Michele and you're listening to Vedge Your Best, it's because we're sharing the show. So
that's beautiful.
Yeah. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Jim.